The first sound that split the winter cabin was not a scream. It was the crack of Elias Parker's ribs under a stranger's boot. May burst through the doorway with the icy wind still clinging to her hair. The cabin glowed with warm candle light from the Christmas tree. Yet the scene on the floor looked like something dragged out of a nightmare. Elias lay twisted on the wooden planks, his face drained of color, his breath scraping in and out like broken glass. Snowflakes drifted in through the open door as if the storm outside had followed the attackers inside. May dropped to her knees. The world around her vanished. There was only his fading breath, the tremor in his fingers, and the terror rising inside her chest. Elias tried to speak, but blood stained the corner of his mouth. His voice was ragged, barely more than a whisper. "Please don't do that." The words trembled. More fear than command. May ignored him. She hooked her hands under his shoulders and pulled him closer to the fire. His body felt heavier than she remembered, colder than she could stand. His chest rose a little, then stalled. May's breath caught. She had seen animals die like this when winter came early and froze them from the inside out. She would not let that happen to him. Without hesitation, she gathered her skirt and climbed onto his torso, planting herself exactly over the shattered ribs. The white fabric of her dress fanned out around him like the wings of some wild angel. The position looked insane, indecent, shocking enough to set the whole town whispering for a year. She pressed down anyway, her palms dug into his sternum, and her weight followed. She remembered something an old army doctor once told her. That when ribs were already broken, sometimes you had to break them the rest of the way just to reach the heart. Elias gasped in agony. His eyes widened. The pain yanked him back to consciousness just long enough, like his body refused to leave the world without saying one last thing. "Don't do that." His voice cracked with pain. But the moment she felt his chest flutter, she pressed harder. The candles on the Christmas tree flickered with every shove, casting frantic shadows that made the cabin feel alive with fear. May ignored the burning in her arms, ignored the tears blurring her sight, ignored the cracking sounds beneath her hands. Every push was a plea for him to stay. Every breath she forced into his lungs was a promise she refused to break. If you have ever begged life to stay when it wanted to leave, you know exactly what she feels right now. Outside, the storm hammered the walls. Inside, it felt like time waited to see if the old rancher would rise again or slip away forever. Then his chest jerked. A weak cough escaped him. May froze, trembling, unsure if she had saved him or hurt him beyond repair. His eyes opened just enough to meet hers, filled with pain and something darker that chilled her deeper than the winter wind. Because this was no simple attack. This was the kind of move a man makes when he thinks no one will ever dare to stand up to him. This was a warning from someone who wanted Elias silent by sunrise. May looked at the door, at the storm, at the blood, and she whispered the question that would decide the fate of the entire story. "Who did this to you?" Elias May sat there for a long moment, her hand still on Elias's chest, feeling the faint rise and fall that proved he was still in this world. The Christmas candles beside the tree burned low, dripping warm wax that tapped softly on the wooden floor. It almost sounded like a tiny clock counting down his time. Elias coughed again, weak and shaky. May leaned close, her breath still fast from the shock. "Tell me who did this." "Elias." Her voice was soft, but the fear underneath it was sharp enough to cut through the cold air. He blinked slowly. Then he nodded toward the table where his coat had been thrown earlier that evening. May reached over, her fingers trembling, and pulled a folded paper from the inside pocket. It was crumpled, stained with a little blood. She opened it gently. It was a notice, a tax seizure for unpaid winter fees, but the numbers were wrong. The signature looked forced, almost shaky, Elias whispered. "Briggs sent that to me this morning. Said, I had until tonight to hand over the ranch, or he would settle it his way." His voice cracked again. "I did not think he meant this." May felt something hot rise in her chest. It was not fear this time. It was anger coming alive, a slow, steady flame that made her spine straighten. She looked around the cabin, at the knocked-over chair, at the muddy boot prints across the floor, at the shattered lantern in the corner. The men who attacked Elias had been in a rush. They believed he would not survive. They expected the winter storm to finish the job. That thought alone made May stand up. Sometimes anger will pull you to your feet long before courage does. She moved to the window and pushed the curtain aside. Snow drifted sideways under the moonlight, glowing white against the dark prairie. She could see the faint shape of horse tracks leading away from the cabin, a twisted pattern of hooves sinking into fresh snow. May grabbed a wool blanket and wrapped it around Elias's shoulders. She could feel him shiver. She set a rifle within his reach and checked the fire one more time, then turned toward the door. She lowered her voice. "We are not letting him take this ranch. Not on Christmas. Not ever." Elias tried to speak, but she placed her hand lightly on his chest. "Save your breath. I will get help and I will get the truth." Her heart was beating fast now, but not from fear. This was something different, something fierce, something she did not know she had until tonight. She turned back to the window, watching the snow fall thicker and faster. Somewhere out there, the sheriff and his men believed they had already won. So May whispered a question that felt like the first spark of the coming storm. "What will they do when they find out you are still alive, Elias?" May stepped outside with the snow biting at her cheeks. And for a moment, she just stood there breathing in the cold air. It helped her steady her nerves, helped her think a little clearer. The moon hung above Dodge City like a silver coin, and the winter wind carried the distant sound of church bells from the Christmas service downtown. It felt almost peaceful, which made the danger waiting out there feel even sharper. She followed the trail of horse tracks leading away from the cabin. They cut across the yard, past the frozen water pump, then veered toward the road that led straight into town. May knelt down, brushed away a layer of fresh snow, and saw something dark underneath, a scrap of red cloth. It was the same color scarf Briggs always wore when he rode into town, the one he claimed was his good luck charm. May let out a breath, so he had been here in person. The idea of that made her jaw tighten. It meant the sheriff had no fear of consequences, no worry about being caught. He believed he owned the town, body and soul. Maybe you have known a man like that in your own life, the kind everyone feared but no one trusted. May climbed onto her horse, a brown mare that stomped impatiently in the cold. She whispered to her, "Easy, girl. We got work to do tonight." The horse flicked her ears and snorted as if she understood. The ride into Dodge City was slow because of the snow, but May kept her focus sharp. The town lights glowed warm behind frosted windows. People were finishing their Christmas supper, sharing stories, singing carols, but none of them knew the sheriff they trusted had nearly killed a man an hour ago. It is strange how a whole town can celebrate in the light while the darkest thing of the night sits just down the road. She tied her horse behind the saloon and slipped through the back alley. The sheriff's office stood across the street and the lantern inside was still burning. Someone was awake. May crept closer and peeked through the side window, her breath caught in her throat. Inside, Sheriff Briggs sat at his desk with his boots crossed on top. He was laughing with two of his men. On the table lay the fake taxpayers, the same ones he had forced on Elias. He lifted his whiskey glass and said something that made the other men roar with laughter. May could not hear the words, but she knew the tone. It was the sound of men who thought nothing and no one could stop them. For a moment, May felt fear settle heavy in her stomach. She was only one person, a young woman, no badge, no weapon, nothing but a scrap of evidence and a heart that refused to give up. If you were still here with her, you can feel that stubborn little heartbeat pushing this story forward, but she straightened her back. She had already saved Elias once tonight. She could face Briggs, too. And that leaves us with a question that might change everything. What will May do now that she has seen the sheriff celebrating his crime right in the heart of Dodge City? If you want to follow the rest of this wild Christmas night, feel free to tap that subscribe button. It helps more than you think. While you listen, grab a warm drink, settle in, and tell me what time it is where you are and where you are listening from. May stayed crouched under the window for a long moment, letting the cold settle into her bones, letting her thoughts line up one by one. Inside the sheriff's office, Briggs poured another drink, still laughing like a man who believed the whole world bent for him. May felt her jaw clench again. She needed proof. Real proof. More than a torn tax notice, more than muddy tracks and a scrap of his scarf. She needed something that would make the whole town stop and stare. If she failed here, everything you have heard so far would end up buried under snow and silence, something that even Briggs could not laugh his way out of. May moved around the side of the building where the snow was deeper. She slid a thin knife from her boot and picked the lock with shaking fingers, a trick her father once taught her for opening stubborn barn gates. The hallway was dark and the warm light from the sheriff's office spilled only a few feet onto the floor. May tiptoed past old wanted posters and stacks of dusty boxes. Her breath came out in small white clouds. At the far end of the hall was the record room. A heavy wooden door stood slightly open, almost as if someone had forgotten to close it in a hurry. May eased herself inside and shut the door softly behind her. The room smelled of ink, cold paper, and tobacco. Shelves lined the walls filled with years of town files. May held the lantern up, scanning each row, tax books, the land ownership logs, complaint reports every winter. The same shaky signature had stolen another ranch while folks were too cold and broke to fight back. May felt her stomach twist. This was not a single crime. This was a pattern. A long one. She gathered what she could. Stacking the papers under her arm. The folder barely closed. Then she froze. Footsteps, slow ones, moving down the hallway. May blew out the lantern and pressed herself against the wall. The room grew darker than midnight. Only a sliver of light came in from under the door. The footsteps stopped right outside. Someone stood there breathing as if they were listening for the smallest rustle. May covered her mouth with her sleeve to muffle her breathing. Her heart thumped so loud she worried it might echo. After a long moment, the footsteps turned away. They moved back toward the front office, steady and heavy, like they belonged to someone who felt entirely safe in his own territory. May exhaled slowly. If you are holding your breath right now, you know how thin the line is between being caught and getting away. Then a thought hit her so fast she almost dropped the folder. If the sheriff found his door unlocked earlier, would he check this room again? Now she faced a choice that could decide the entire night. Even as she told herself she already held enough to break him in front of everyone. One question would not leave her alone. Should she run for the square now or risk staying long enough to find the last piece of evidence that could break Briggs for good? May pressed the stack of stolen papers tight against her chest and slipped back into the night. The cold air hit her face like a warning, but she kept moving. She crossed the snowy street with quick steps, her breath rising in small clouds as she headed toward the town square. From a distance, she could already see the glow of lanterns, the tall Christmas tree, and the people gathering for the yearly holiday announcement. It looked peaceful, almost beautiful, but she knew what kind of truth waited to be shown. Stay with this moment because the next few breaths will change the life of every soul in that square. When May reached the edge of the crowd, she pulled her hood back and stepped forward. Briggs stood at the center of the square, holding the fake tax notice like it was the law of the land. He smiled at the folks around him, the same smile he used every time he took something that did not belong to him. May walked straight into the light. She reached into her pocket and held up the torn strip of red cloth she found in the snow outside Elias's cabin. The same scarf Briggs never rode without. This was found in the blood at Elias Parker's door tonight. Sheriff Briggs did not lose it at church. Her boots crunched in the snow. The crowd turned. Some gasped, recognizing the girl who had raced into town that Christmas night with a look they had never seen on her before. Briggs looked up. The smile slipped just a little. May said nothing at first. She let the silence do the work. Then she lifted the folder and let the papers fall across the wooden platform. They scattered in the cold wind. Each page telling a story the town had almost forgotten. Names of families who had lost everything. Businesses forced to shut down. False signatures winter after winter. Year after year, the crowd murmured. Briggs tried to talk, but his voice cracked. People pushed closer, reading the papers, putting the pieces together. Truth has a strange way of waking people up. And that night it woke the whole town at once. It did not take long before the deputies stepped forward and took Briggs by the arms. No shouting, no struggle, only the quiet understanding that something wrong had finally been made right. May stood still for a moment, letting the weight of it all settle in her chest. She thought of Elias waiting in the cabin. She thought of the fear she had felt hours earlier, and she thought of how far courage could stretch when someone had no choice but to find it. Sometimes life pushes us into battles we never asked for. Sometimes we stand up anyway. And maybe as you listen, you can feel a small part of you standing up beside her, too. And sometimes the smallest person in the coldest night becomes the reason an entire town wakes up to the truth. Later that night, Elias lay safe by the fire while snow whispered against the cabin walls. May watched his chest rise and fall and finally let herself believe they had survived this Christmas night. What would you have done if you'd been standing in that snow? With the truth in your hands and the whole town watching you. If this story moved you even a little, feel free to tap like and subscribe so you can follow more of these Wild West tales. While you listen, pour yourself a warm drink, relax for a moment, and tell me what time it is, where you are, and where you're listening.